Every major patch, we get the same question in our Discord. Why is my rating so much lower than it was last season? Did I get worse? To answer your question, probably not. But we completely understand why so many people have this feeling, and chances are you probably wondered the same thing. What you will learn today is that your arena rating is determined by something completely out of your control, and a system within the game itself might be having unintended consequences for everyone on the ladder. Today, we will be talking about inflation, and no, we don't mean explaining why your coffee is suddenly $5. We're talking about MMR inflation within World of Warcraft, and believe us, there is probably a lot you don't know. It's a complicated thing, meant to solve a few problems, but in doing so, it has created some issues of its own. We spoke to challengers, rivals, gladiators, and even some of the highest rated players of all time to see how rating inflation has affected different PvPers within the game. And along the way, we discovered some pretty crazy things. So join us as we take you through the insanity of MMR inflation and show you what consequences it has, what potential solutions might be needed, and to ask ourselves, why do we even PvP in the first place? We hope you stick around, because the problems we will uncover are definitely bigger than we initially thought. Before we get into it though, we just did a major revamp on our Discord server, and trust us, you don't want to miss out. We've introduced a new LFG channel where you can connect with players within the community, which includes a new ranking system so you can find partners that are right for you. We also have new class-specific channels where you can theory craft with our team of expert players. And if you want to pitch your ideas for the next skill cap video, you can do that by submitting content suggestions. Of course, all our website members get access to the premium section of our Discord server, where our team of pro players can answer any PvP related questions. So what are you waiting for? Join over 13,000 members of the PvP community by clicking the link below. Anyway, back to the video. When we make these types of videos, it requires us to take a step back in time and look at the past. Obviously, the arena system we have today is different than what we had nearly 15 years ago. But one thing that has been consistent for nearly 2 decades is the confusion about how arena rating actually works. For the vast majority of arena's history, rating goes up or down based on your matchmaking rating, which is often called MMR. When you win or lose in arena, the game distributes points to each team based on a system called ELO. This system is quite complicated, which is why game developers hire experienced engineers to specifically tailor rating systems to their individual games. You might already be familiar with ELO in games like League of Legends, and it's even used in real-life competitions like chess, which has its own ranking system. Once again, ELO is really complicated, and by no means are we experts on how it works exactly. The main thing you need to know is that it's kind of based on predictions. ELO systems will distribute rating according to probability. If the system thinks you have a 75% chance to win, it will reward you comparably less points than it would if your chance to win was only 25%. And the reverse is true. If you lose a game that you have a 75% chance to win, you will lose more points than you would if your chance to win was 25%. We don't want to bore you with some nerdy math, and we promise all this will eventually tie together in a complete picture. But for the meantime, what you need to know is that your rating is a result of your MMR, which itself is a result of ELO. You might have already known this and might be asking, okay, so what is the issue? To answer that question, we have to discuss the hidden system that affects your rating, because this is where things get a bit complicated. When many people think of MMR, they're thinking of one number. If you win, that number goes up, and if you lose, that number goes down. What many people don't know is that MMR is actually a formula of at least 2 values. One we will call variable rating, and the other we will call base rating. When MMR is going up or down every game due to wins and losses, those games affect the variable rating. But base rating is determined by game developers, and in WoW, this value will get bigger over time, regardless of how many games you win or lose in any specific time frame. This is what we call inflation, and it has been part of the game for quite some time. At the highest end of the ladder, inflation is what determines the ceiling of arena rating, and in some seasons, the highest rated players will hit the MMR cap. But then eventually inflation will cause this cap to rise, and the top teams will be able to gain points until they hit that cap once again. It is impossible to know for certain how inflation actually works, but based on interviews and from anecdotal stories, base rating will increase anywhere from 10 to 20 points in any given week. And that is exactly what Holinka confirmed in this interview nearly 1 year ago.
All of the ratings are built around this middle ground of 1500, and like you're either, way better than 1500 or you're way worse than 1500, but 1500 is kind of the middle. And what we do is we move that middle over the course of the season, currently at a rate of about 10 rating per week. So second week of the season, first week of the season, it's 1,500. Second week of the season, it's 1,520. So you slowly move up rating over time.
You might be wondering, why was Halinka talking about rating inflation if it had been in the game for quite some time? To answer that question, we have to dig a bit deeper and look at one of the new systems that would become quite controversial, as it would shape character progression for the entirety of Shadowlands. The beginning of every expansion is always an exciting time. This is generally when the game feels the most active and the most fresh, and the launch of Shadowlands would prove to be no different. All throughout the game, players were actively testing all of the new features, toying around with the new Covenant system, and farming honor for the upcoming PvP season. This time, however, the grind wouldn't stop with a full set of honor gear. Instead, honor would be saved in preparation for the newly added gear upgrades. This new system, at least according to Blizzard's own words, was to give players a granular sense of progression. Instead of getting a full set of gear within a few weeks, players could now look forward to upgrading their gear piece by piece to make the process of gearing seem more engaging. While many players initially didn't give this system much thought, it would become apparent that there was one huge issue. As the season progressed, players began experiencing the effects of this upgrade system. Instead of having instant access to most of your best in slot gear, you had to work incrementally for every piece and every upgrade. Eventually, lower rated players started to feel the consequences of this new design, as they weren't actually able to progress to the next upgrade. And a grind that was meant to feel granular eventually started to feel rocky, but maybe something could be done. WoW PvP is unique in a few different ways, and its progression system is really what sets it apart from other games. As you get better in WoW, you gain access to increasingly powerful rewards, which in turn makes you even better. As you gain rating, your character gets stronger, which in theory should make gaining rating even easier. This is completely different than other games that use the ELO matchmaking system. In League of Legends, for instance, ranking up from silver to gold doesn't make your loadout any better the next game. And if you play chess, having a higher rating than your opponent doesn't mean your pieces will be any stronger. What truly defines WoW is ultimately the subject of endless critique, that getting better in the game gives you a direct advantage over lower rated opponents. When this gap is small, the power differences are only a couple of percentage points. This might not seem like a big deal. After all, WoW has had forms of gear upgrades in previous expansions, such as more powerful weapons for getting 2.2k in Wrath, Cataclysm, and Mists of Pandaria. But in Shadowlands Season 1, the difference between entry-level and fully upgraded gear was over 20 item levels, representing a 20% difference in player power. While the start of the season saw massive levels of participation, something was slowly developing in the quiet background. Players all across the ladder were seeing much lower ratings than in previous seasons. The gear upgrade system, which was supposed to provide players with a quote, granular system of progression, was proving to be a gatekeeper in itself. Remember, WoW is one of the only competitive games where character power is directly increased with higher ranks, and as players would find out, having huge item level differences between rankings would become a massive hurdle. And as the season would progress, gear disparities would gradually increase. And since gear meant power and power meant rating, the arena ladder went into a recession. Data collected by Ludus Labs showed that player ratings were 250 points lower on average in Shadowlands Season 1 compared to BFA Season 4. The median rating in 3v3 at the time of this blog post was around 1,500, which meant over half the player base couldn't upgrade their gear past 213 item level, putting most players anywhere from 13 to 26 eye levels behind fully geared players. This difference would serve as an artificial gate for many combatant, challenger, and even rivals at the time, as rating would seem to stagnate to near deflated levels in the middle of the season. In fact, at one point, this rating deflation was so extreme that Blizzard actually reduced the rating requirement of the seasonal mount from 1,400 to 1,000. Yes, that's right, the seasonal mount had its rating requirement reduced by 400 points. Seems pretty extreme. With MMR starting to stagnate, something was also happening on the other side of the ladder. As the rat race of the early seasons started to subside, the rank 1 cutoff would hardly move as weeks went by. Deflated ratings allowed players at the highest MMR to sit their rating for months straight. In fact, this was so extreme that at one point, 96 out of the top 100 players in North America had not queued a single game for over 30 days straight. It might be easy to point fingers and say how unfair it was to sit rating during this time, but there seemed to be an incentive problem. 96 out of the top 100 players had virtually no reason to queue. With item levels gating players at the low end of the ladder, and with a lack of incentives bottlenecking MMR at the high end, there seemed to be a huge problem. The natural inflation wasn't happening. Players couldn't distribute MMR at both ends of the ladder. Remember that MMR is a combination of two things: variable rating from players and base rating from the game itself. If variable rating wasn't moving up, then base rating would have to take the wheel.
But as the season progressed, and especially when we got to 905, it felt like the activity on the ladder went down significantly, and it was harder to find games, and the queue times were longer, and it was incredibly difficult at the speaking for like the highest ratings, and even at the lowest ratings as well. It felt like it was really difficult to actually climb rating and actually like push ranks and rating. Have you guys talked about like any ways you could maybe, fix that, so like later on in the season there's still reasons for people to want to queue and participate?
After Season 1 came to an end, players were eager for a fresh start in Season 2. After Hlinka's interview, it became publicly clear that more rating inflation was needed. On paper, it would allow players on the lower end of the ladder to upgrade their gear, and on the higher end, Rank 1 teams would be forced to queue. For multiple expansions, incentivizing activity seemed to be a problem. Over the past decade, solutions like rating decay and cosmetic rewards were all pitched as ways to solve this complicated relationship between arena rating and ladder activity. A more aggressive MMR inflation would become the solution in Shadowlands Season 2. Lower rated players could finally get their upgrades, duelists on the cusp of Gladiator could finally hit a new benchmark, and Rank 1 players would no longer be able to sit rating. Let the inflation begin. With a steady injection of MMR inflation every week, players began to break new barriers. The Rank 1 cutoff on EU grew from 2.9k in Season 1 to 3,500 in Season 2. Below that, the number of Gladiator achievements skyrocketed, as duelist players were finally able to break through the 2,400 barrier. And finally, with more ranks to upgrade, players who were previously stuck at the 1,400 median in Season 1 saw their average rating inflate by nearly 300. Never before had inflation been so extreme. Everyone was gaining rating everywhere, and this was happening all at once. But then, everything vanished. The solution that gave everyone what they always wanted would prove to create its own issues. Remember, MMR is two things at the same time, and at the start of every season, base rating gets reset and inflation gets erased. And with Season 2 ratings being nearly 400 points higher than normal, that means seasonal progress would get reset dramatically. Players who were once Gladiator would now have to fight their toughest matches at duelist ratings, and below that, rivals, challengers, and combatants immediately had their ratings reset. Now, of course, this is expected. After all, rating gets wiped at the start of every season. But with inflation being so high at the end of Season 2, this reset felt more dramatic than ever. Instead of getting back to where they left off, players would have to wait until the inflation system gave them the luxury of recapturing the rating they once achieved, and will take a really long time, which kinda sucks. We are nearly 4 months into the season, and the vast majority of players we surveyed are still at a lower rating than they were last patch. Not a really good feeling. We spoke to some of these players, ranging from challenger to duelist ratings, getting their take on exactly what happened and how they feel.
My name is Mortai. That's my game tag on pretty much everything, and I play primarily rogue and hunter, although I play a little of everything. And this season, my highest title so far is Challenger. My goal this season was 1800. That's still my goal. I'm not sure if I'm going to get there, but I haven't hit 1800 before. This season, it just seems a lot harder. A lot of times, it seems like every time I enter an arena match now, the other team has somebody on a glad mount, whether it's Season 1, Season 2, they have a glad mount of some kind, even at like the 1600 rating that I'm playing at. I want to be able to just queue arena and focus on climbing and not have to worry about gear upgrades as well the whole time while I'm climbing.
As a current rival player trying to achieve duelist, I think rating inflation means that I'm going to be more likely to reach my goals the longer the season continues, and that means it's going to be harder to reach goals at the beginning of a season too. Having that rating inflation be adjusted from season to season can make it kind of hard to gauge progress. I was seeing a decent number of gladiator mounts in threes at around a 1500 MMR, including one team that had 2 gladiators and a rank 1.
I do think that the nice thing about inflation is that as the season goes on, you still feel like you're progressing. If you just hit a wall, it's kind of demotivating, and it also, at least for myself, it's kind of like, oh, okay, then why am I still playing this? Because clearly it's not working. So that does feel nice when you have the feeling of progression, but then on the other hand, it's also kind of like a false feeling of progression if it's not really actual progression. It's just a passive rating inflation. In such a competitive game mode, the only thing that should really differentiate you from other players is your skill, and not necessarily how good your gear is, because that has nothing to do with how good of a player you are.
Virtually everyone we talked to between Combatant and Gladiator had the same feeling, that MMR resets can make it more difficult to track progress as a player. The inflation of Season 2 will continue to have ripple effects across the entire PvP ecosystem, and LFG is where it might hit the hardest. As we have all experienced at some point, LFG continues to have a massive trust issue, where you are required to put your faith in the honesty of other players' experience. If you miss out playing during a highly inflated season, your rating experience is going to be lower than people of the same skill level who played during inflation periods, and to us, that seems like a massive issue. The reverse is also a problem. If someone claims to be duelist experience, it could actually mean that they are rival rated if inflation is that extreme. It's already hard enough to form or join groups, and this might become even harder if we continue to see massive rating fluctuations from season to season. If you've been following this channel, you probably already know about our Road to Glad series. We checked back on Arrow to hear his thoughts after coming off of 2.6k rating and a fresh Gladiator achievement from Season 2.
We hit Gladiator last season, the team. So I was expecting this season to push relatively quickly. At the end of the last season, I was 26-20, and this season, currently, I'm 22-20. So I'm about exactly 400 CR behind where I left. When we pushed, I noticed we weren't gaining as much rating, and it was getting kind of tough to push around a certain like 2-1, 2-2. That feels demoralizing, being used to playing on a higher MMR. I actually started looking up every single player we met for 2 days straight, and they were all very high previously. So I started to use my opponents to kind of compare to last season. It still kind of feels kind of bad, because people this season still have their XP, so there's like 3k XP players or like 2.7 XP players. Being 2-2 when there's so many high XP players makes you feel like, am I losing it? Like, am I getting worse? Am I not improving? Am I stuck on something?
Until seasonal inflation really kicks in, many Gladiator players and Glad hopefuls will be at the whim of an MMR system that makes seasonal progress much more difficult to track. And it doesn't end there. At the highest level, seasonal inflation will continue to affect the battle for rank 1 in a way that might feel a bit unfair. Season 2 had relatively stable rating increases for the majority of the season, because like other MMR systems, rating in WoW is meant to gradually plateau. And during Season 2, that plateau was growing steadily until it abruptly exploded in its last 2 weeks. What that meant is that if you were pursuing rank 1 and grinding your heart out for 90% of the season, none of that would have mattered if you weren't able to play those last 2 weeks. The system that was meant to solve rating sitting and inactivity would prove to be quite punishing to people who played for over 90% of the season. Across the entire ladder, the ripple effect of Shadowlands inflation will continue to be felt, and it's unclear what it will affect next. If you've played WoW for a long time, you already know the complexities of its rewards. In order to feel rewarded in PvP, there are countless steps you have to take, obstacles you have to identify, and barriers you have to break through. MMR inflation might be a temporary solution to change incentives and manage rewards, but maybe it's just a band-aid for a much larger problem. After all, we have to ask ourselves, what keeps us playing WoW PvP? Whenever we encounter new systems, whether it be gear upgrades, titles, or a number on the ladder, this question can help us understand how we should feel about changes in the game.
My gamer tag is Treesap Jake. The class that I play is Shaman, and the spec I play the most is Elemental Shaman. I think with the PvP system, I always much preferred the WOD gearing system. And I remember watching Stoops' videos early on, and my thoughts, and I thought it'd be okay, but just the sheer amount of honor that you need, and the fact that someone with unranked gear versus someone with duelist gear, despite you both having the same PvP gear, sort of in commas, the damage difference is quite considerable, and the amount of honor between that is quite vast. It's I think they could do in the future a better job just by making it so that get your gear just from grinding conquest. The thing that interests me the most about PvP is how much I've enjoyed the randomness of it all. When I play PvP, I find every single match, I just can't stop. There's like forever there seems to be something that stimulates me, and that is really just the fact that you can't change how humans react, and that sort of human element is what always has attracted me.
No matter how frustrating it can be to lose against RMP or to get one shot by a Destro Warlock, we still have that desire to join queue. A healthy arena ladder needs everyone to have this feeling. MMR inflation might bring us closer to our goalpost, but ultimately it is up to us to decide if our goals are worth pursuing. Is there a solution to all this? We don't know. Maybe it involves more cosmetic rewards, more unique titles, or even changing the entire rating system itself. For the meantime, all we can do is continue playing. At the end of the day, WoW is a game built around memories and experiences. We're going to ask you the same question. Why do you play PvP? Alright guys, these videos are always a grind for us, and we want to personally thank you for sticking around until the end. If you have time, be sure to check out skillcap.com/wow. There you will find a lot of amazing new content designed to make the PvP experience easier for you. And if you want to help us both out, consider hitting that subscribe button. We put out a lot of PvP content, and we have a lot more coming. In any case, we want to thank you all for watching. See you soon.